They told me I was dead to them. 17 years old, pregnant, alone. My parents stood in the kitchen that night with faces carved from ice. And my mother's words still burn in my ears. You've ruined our name. From this day forward, we have no daughter. I begged. I cried. My father wouldn't even look at me. They threw me out with nothing but a torn backpack and the swelling secret in my belly. I thought I'd never see them again. I built a life from ashes. I raised my son with every ounce of strength I had. And when he grew, he soared higher than I could have ever imagined, an international star, adored by millions. And just when I thought the past was buried, my parents came crawling back. Not with apologies, not with remorse, but with demands. They wanted in, and I gave them exactly what they asked for. And more. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about family betrayal. It's about the kind of revenge that waits almost 3 decades before striking. I grew up in a small, conservative town where appearances mattered more than truth. Everyone knew everyone, and gossip traveled faster than light. Respect wasn't earned, it was performed. My father, Richard, was a deacon at the local church, a man admired for his stern sermons and spotless reputation. My mother, Margaret, was just as visible, running the women's charity committee, the kind of woman who could smile sweetly while cutting someone to pieces with her words. Together, they were the model couple, strict, cold, respected. And then there was me, Evelyn, their only daughter. I wasn't rebellious, not really. I studied hard, helped around the house, stayed out of trouble. But I craved affection, warmth, something I never got at home. That's why, when I met Daniel, everything changed. He wasn't wealthy, he wasn't ambitious, but he was kind. And when kindness is a rare currency in your life, you cling to it like breath itself. I was 16 when we fell in love. 17 when I found out I was pregnant. The world blurred the moment I saw those 2 lines. I was terrified but hopeful. Somewhere deep down, I thought maybe my parents would help. That they'd be disappointed, maybe furious, but still stand by me. Family was supposed to protect you, wasn't it? I was wrong. Good night, I told them. The kitchen was silent at first. My father's face turned red, his fists clenching at his sides. My mother's lips curled like she'd just bitten something sour. You'll shame us all, she hissed. You'll destroy your father's reputation. Do you have any idea what people will say? Her words cut deeper than knives, but it was my father's that broke me. He didn't hesitate, didn't even blink. Pack your things, he said coldly. Get out. That was it. 17 years old, pregnant, suddenly homeless. Daniel tried to stand by me in the beginning. He held my hand, swore we'd figure it out together. But his parents had money, influence. They told him I would ruin his future. They wore him down until he cracked. By the time my belly began to swell, he was gone too. I was alone. The months that followed were hell. I worked at diners, bussing tables until my feet bled. I slept in shelters when I couldn't scrape together enough for rent. I learned quickly how cruel the world could be to a girl with nothing but a baby on the way. Neighbors whispered. Old friends crossed the street to avoid me. And then, when I thought I couldn't go on, an unexpected hand reached out. Mrs. Foster, the owner of a little bookstore on the edge of town, offered me a room above her shop and a part-time job stocking shelves. She was kind in ways I hadn't known adults could be. She gave me more than food and shelter. She gave me hope. 9 months later, I gave birth to my son, Lucas. He was my salvation. His tiny cries, his fragile fingers wrapped around mine, they anchored me in the storm. Every sleepless night, every meal I skipped so he could eat, every cruel glance from neighbors, it was worth it for his smile. Years passed. Lucas grew, and so did his gift. He had a voice haunting, powerful, unforgettable. By 14, he was singing at local fairs. By 18, he had gone viral online. By 21, he was touring the world. His name shining on billboards. I never dreamed I'd see Dot, and through it all, my parents never called. Not a word. Not a letter. I didn't even know if they were alive until the night Lucas was invited to perform at the Grammys. That's when they showed up. Two faces from the past, smiling like nothing had ever happened. The knock at my apartment came 2 days before Lucas's first Grammy performance. It was polite, measured, the kind of knock that pretends to be harmless and never is. I opened the door and froze. There they were. My parents stood up close. The years had carved them into smaller versions of themselves. My father's hair was thinner, his shoulders slumped, but his eyes were the same cold and unblinking. My mother's face was lined, her mouth pulled into that steady, practiced sneer she used for Sunday greetings and charity teas. They looked like people who expected favors, people who expected to be served. "Evelyn," my mother said, sweet as syrup. "We've come to talk about our grandson." Our grandson. The words hit me like a slap. For a ridiculous second, I wanted to laugh. I wanted to pretend this was some bad dream I could wake up from. They walked in without asking, as if they owned the place. My mother's perfume filled the small room, an expensive floral scent that always made me feel like dirt. My father sat in my armchair, the one I'd had since college. He seemed surprised that it still fit. "We saw him on television," he said, like he was delivering a sermon. "Lucas, he's quite famous now." "Yes," my mother added, smoothing the lapels of an immaculate jacket. "Fame comes with obligations. Family obligations." Her voice was clinical, rehearsed. I wanted to say, "You abandoned us." I wanted to scream. Instead, I said the truth. Quiet, but sharp. "You disowned me. You told me I was dead to you." My mother's eyes narrowed. The mask slipped for a heartbeat, just a flash of the woman who'd pushed me out into the dark. Then the smile returned, colder than before. "We did what was necessary," she said. "But Lucas is different. He carries our blood. The world should know who his real family is." They had a plan. I could see it in the way my father's fingers tapped his knee, in the way my mother adjusted the angle of her chin, like actors waiting for their cue. They'd already spun a story in their heads, faithful grandparents rediscovering the prodigal child. A redemptive arc? A photo op? "You threw us out," I said. "You told me to leave?" They acted as if that fact was irrelevant, as if the ledger of their sins had been wiped clean by time and a new headline. My father leaned in, the voice of the upright man he always pretended to be. "We've spoken to a few journalists," he said. "They're interested in a piece, the grandparents who stood by their daughter. If we appear with Lucas, if we're seen on stage, it will humanize him. It will strengthen his image. Everyone loves a wholesome family." My stomach went cold. They weren't asking. They were bartering, trading authenticity for access, repackaging cruelty as virtue and expecting applause. I laughed. It came out thin. "Real family? You threw us out like trash." They shrugged, as if cruelty were a ledger entry they could balance with a smile. That's when my mother's hand turned into a weapon. She let her smile fall, and the old venomous Margaret surfaced. "If you refuse," she said, slow and deliberate, "we'll have no choice but to speak plainly. People love a scandal. They'll eat it. We'll tell them everything they want to hear about your teenage choices, the men you were seen with, the boys who came and went. We'll remind them that Lucas..." I didn't rush. Real revenge is a slow thing. It grows teeth while you sleep. It learns the rhythm of the people you hate. I waited. I watched. I prepared. First rule: never act when you're angry. Act when you're ready. The first step was information. I started small calls to people who still remembered them. a neighbor who'd watched them host charity dinners, a former church treasurer who'd quietly left after a single sermon. Names, dates, small painful details that stitched together into a bigger picture. What I found was uglier than memory. My father had been caught embezzling church funds years ago. He'd skirted prison on the back of favors and lawyers. My mother had used her committee influence to bury complaints. The town knew something had happened. They just pretended it didn't. They lived like ghosts in a crumbling house, one of those places with curtains that never moved and a mailbox full of threats. They nursed grudges and reputations in equal measure. Now they saw Lucas as a gold mine, not a grandson. A product. I needed proof, not rumors. Proof that would make a respectable paper stop smiling. I needed records, receipts, the names of people who could no longer afford to keep quiet. I made calls. I traded favors. I paid for copies of old church minutes. I drove to neighboring towns and sat on stoops with retired parishioners who still hated my father for what he'd done. I listened. I recorded. I took photographs. It wasn't clean work. It was quiet, almost ugly. I felt like a thief only. I was stealing back the truth. Then I found Laura. She'd been the treasurer the year the accounts started to tumble. She had a ledger tucked away in a box of charity ribbons. She had the receipts. She had the courage. She had the anger I needed. We met in a coffee shop. She slid a thin binder across the table and watched me like someone watching a fuse burn. "This will ruin them," she said. "Are you sure?" I looked at the neat, incriminating numbers, the dates that matched the years I was living in shelters. I felt something like cold satisfaction. "Yes," I said. Next, the journalist. I couldn't do this alone. I reached out to someone reputable, a reporter who'd once exposed a governor's shell company. She was careful. She asked questions that made me wince. She wanted witnesses on record. She wanted corroboration. She wanted context. I gave it all. I gave her Mrs. Foster's name, the woman who'd sheltered me. I gave her Laura's ledger. I gave her the story of a girl thrown into the night while the parish posted pictures of charity teas. She asked one more thing. Could I wait until the right moment? I said yes. While the journalist checked and double-checked, I put on a performance for my parents. I let them think they had me. I called them occasionally soft and wavering, like a woman who might be bought with apologies and photo ops. I told them I'd consider letting them meet Lucas. I let their voices get louder with hope. I watched them practice lines when they thought I wasn't listening. I watched my mother try on old smiles in the mirror. I watched my father rehearse humble phrases. They didn't notice how their eagerness made them sloppy at home. I kept a different ritual. Each night when Lucas slept, I sat with the binder from Lavra and read. I read the receipts until the dates blurred, until I knew every signature by heart. Sometimes late, I dreamt of my father's sermons and my mother's hands folding napkins for another charity dinner. In the dreams, the house creaked like an old throat clearing. The creak stayed with me during the day, an odd superstition I couldn't shake. Maybe revenge has its own sound. Maybe karma makes noise before it moves. There were small victories. A website quietly took down a puff piece that had praised my parents years ago after I supplied the ledger. A former parishioner who'd been paid hush money agreed to an on-record interview. The journalist found an old bank statement tying a series of transfers to a shell account. Each tiny revelation was a pinprick. Each pinprick made them itch. There were also losses. Once, a promising lead evaporated when a witness changed their story. Once, a document I thought I had turned out to be a Xerox of a Xerox-aged, illegible. Those nights I felt weak. I wanted to burn everything down and run. But the plan was bigger than my anger, bigger than their smugness. Bigger than a single headline dot as Grammy night approached, the tension tightened like a wire. My parents became bolder in their rehearsals. They started whispering about the cameras they'd meet, the apologies they'd parrot. My mother bought a dress that made her look younger by $50. My father practiced humility in front of the mirror, as if contrition could be learned like a verse. I told Lucas to keep his focus, to sing for himself, to let nothing distract him. He was nervous but steady. He trusted me. The journalist told me she would run the story during the pre-show. She said timing was everything. She said the blow had to land when their faces were still smoothed and their smiles still glued on stage. She said the public needed the truth before the cameras could tell a different lie. On the night, the world felt like a held breath. The dressing rooms smelled of perfume and hairspray. The red carpet was a river of flashbulbs. My parents moved like hungry birds, searching for a perch. I watched them from the wings, smiling, playing the sometimes daughter they expected. I had done the slow work. I had gathered the pieces. I had waited until the moment when nothing could be undone. And then, as the cameras warmed and the audience sang along to pre-show chatter, the journalist segment began to roll. It wasn't about charity. It wasn't about redemption. It was about truth. The reporter's feature aired during the Grammy pre-show. Millions of viewers tuned in, expecting glitter and gowns, but instead, they got my story, not the version my parents had rehearsed. The screen showed the truth. A 17-year-old girl cast out by her church-going parents, pregnant and alone. Footage of shelters I'd stayed in. Statements from neighbors who remembered the night I was dragged out with nothing but a backpack. Photos of me working at the diner while my parents smiled at charity galas. Then came the killing blow. Public records of my father's embezzlement scandal. Testimonies from church members who'd lost their savings. The journalist laid it out clearly. Richard and Margaret weren't model Christians or saintly grandparents. They were frauds. Cruel, greedy hypocrites who had abandoned their own daughter, only to return when fame and fortune beckoned. By the time Lucas set foot on the red carpet, the narrative was already ablaze. Reporters didn't care about his tuxedo or the glittering stage. They wanted to know how it felt to be betrayed by blood. They wanted to know if he would ever forgive them. I didn't need to answer. The world already knew. I caught sight of my parents backstage. Their faces had drained of color, their smiles stretched thin like masks melting under heat. They looked trapped, hunted. Every microphone shoved toward them carried the weight of their sins. And then Lucas stepped into the spotlight. My son, my miracle. He sang with a voice that silenced the room, clear and soaring, full of heartbreak and hope. It wasn't just a performance. It was an exorcism. When the last note faded, the stadium erupted. The cameras cut to him, tears shining in his eyes as he said, "This is for my mother, the strongest person I know." The audience rose to its feet. A standing ovation, not just for his talent, but for our survival. And in that thunder of applause, I saw my parents shrink. They weren't basking in borrowed glory. They weren't part of his story. They were the villains, exposed under the brightest lights of all. They slunk out before the show even ended, swallowed by the shadows they had tried so hard to escape. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel shame when their names were spoken. I felt free. In the days that followed. Their downfall was merciless. The story spread like wildfire. Every outlet dug deeper, unearthing scandals they thought were long buried. Former church members denounced them. Their so-called charities collapsed overnight. Within a week, Richard and Margaret weren't respected pillars of the community. They were disgraced relics, symbols of hypocrisy and greed. Meanwhile, Lucas's star only shone brighter. His fan base rallied behind him, praising not just his talent, but his honesty, his resilience, his devotion to family, the real kind. Brands lined up. Opportunities poured in. His career didn't just survive the storm, it thrived because of it. They tried to reach me once more. A letter arrived, heavy with excuses, self-pity, and thinly veiled threats. I didn't read a word of it. I fed it to the fire and watched the smoke curl away, because some wounds don't close. Some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness. Do I regret it? Not for a second. I didn't give them redemption or a reunion. I gave them the one thing they deserved: truth, exposed in the brightest light possible. And in that reflection, I finally saw myself, not abandoned, not broken, but uncheckable. What would you have done in my place?